Hey, how y'all doing? So the other day I did a video about heroism and about how pro wrestling, has been following Hollywood. Whether it's, the big 80s action stars equating to Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior and guys like that, to Hollywood's nebulous concept of content and entertainment, which have led to WWE basically becoming entertainment. Same thing with AEW, just to a lesser degree, and Impact uh, likewise. But in this video, I'm not going to talk about wrestling at all. I just want to talk about how, the difference in heroism has come about these days, particularly with the influence of Japanese anime and manga. There have been a lot of people talking about American comic books and Japanese and manga and anime, how these things are kicking the ass of the American comic book industry. And by the numbers, that seems to be true. But more and more anime that I watch, I start to see a dangerous pattern that I don't like. And that pattern is the crybaby male protagonist. It is something that I don't know when it began. I couldn't tell you when it began. But it just started out of nowhere, where a lot of the popular anime would have uber emotional male protagonists, and it wasn't the kind of stuff that I grew up watching. You know, like when I grew up watching, I didn't read manga as a kid. I didn't even know it existed really. But when I watched anime as a kid, one of the first things people recognize is Dragon Ball. When you watch Dragon Ball, there's probably an entire 200 episodes, season 200 episodes or whatever of Dragon Ball. There's probably about 6 episodes of any character, any male character crying. Goku cried in the whole series. He cried once. That's when he met his grandpa Gohan after he thought he was dead, and he saw him again with the halo over his head. He cried. Vegeta, he cried. He died fighting Frieza. Gohan was a child, so him crying makes sense. But, you had very, very, very few tears. Compare that to some of the anime today, like My Hero Academia, which I love. I love My Hero Academia. I think it tells a great superhero story. But Midoriya is a fucking crybaby. He literally cries all the time. He literally sometimes cries for no reason. Full Metal Alchemist was another one where you had Ed Elric. He cried almost all the time. And it was like sometimes, like, I'm not one of these people who say, a man should never cry, he should be like Batman. Even though Batman is now crying in the comic books all the fucking time. But you can write an emotional scene where a man cries, and it makes sense because we've seen that the story makes sense. There are times when you can write a story and a man is crying, and there's a reason for it. But male tears do not engender the same response as female tears. And I think sometimes people seem to think that it does. It doesn't. And this is a natural thing that if you see a woman crying, you go, what's wrong? What happened? You see a man crying, you may at first be like, okay, what's wrong? What happened? Or you may even be frightened, depending on the size of the guy. But then later on, you're like, oh God, this guy being neurotic and emotional, it's not very heroic. It doesn't really work as a hero story. So I've been watching this anime called Tokyo Revenger. It's a pretty good anime. It's about a guy who has, these abilities to send his consciousness back in time, and he's trying to save his middle school girlfriend, who ends up dying at some point in the future. But he is an absolute crybaby. It's like even whether it's as an adult or as a child, he's a crybaby. And he's constantly being bullied and pushed around, and he's the main character, the main protagonist of the series, and it's through we're supposed to believe, we're supposed to buy into that despite his emotional nature, he's still going to do the right thing. He's still trying to stand up to his fears, and that's usually what we're trying to get through here. Same thing with Midoriya. He cries a lot, he's scared a lot, but he's fighting through his fear. He's fighting through his sadness. He's willing to, keep going forward. He's not falling apart. He's crying, sure, but he's willing to push forward. You know, the same thing with Ed in Full Metal Alchemist. But I just kind of just was like, you know, sometimes when you see enough of the tears and enough of the crying, you just say to yourself, what the fuck am I looking at here? You know, like, uh, you have his friends babying him, and you're just like, no. And it's like, and then when you see certain things, you even say that that's weird. Like, you see and this is, I believe, part of the feminist doctrine, is they believe male vulnerability is sexy. So you will see that these characters really don't have no problem getting girlfriends. You know, they'll have a love interest in the story. Um, and the love interest actually likes that about them, that they're so vulnerable, that they're so sensitive. And it's like, sure, but a woman, from my experience of women, they like men to be vulnerable to a degree. You know, if you're a poet and you know willing to put your heart on your sleeve, take the risks and get embarrassed, you know they like risk taking. You know, it has to be a masculine way of being sensitive. Um, you know, but the breaking down, weeping, you know, constantly being in submission, which is a thing in Tokyo Revengers where the guy is like literally submitting to his enemies because he can't fight, so he's not even going to try. He just breaks down crying, and it's just like, what the fuck is going on? You know, like, it's not that bad in like My Hero Academia or Full Metal Alchemist, or I believe Naruto was another one that cried a lot. It's not as bad usually in those shows because you know the courage of the hero, his backbone is usually in his courage and his bravery. So even if he is, you know, a kid and he's pushing through fear and those kinds of things, it's usually not that bad. It's like he has to man up eventually, and then he does do it. But then you have shows like Evangelion, where the guy is crying like the entire time. He never gets used to it. He never, you know, comes to grips with the situation that he's in. It's just constant fucking weeping and haranguing and hand wringing. It's like, ugh, how the fuck is this guy a hero in any way? You know, how do you sit and watch this shit? There was another show that I watched when I was a kid. It was on Toonami. It's called Blue Gender. And Blue Gender was about a guy who had, you know, mistakenly gotten locked in a time machine, or he got locked in a cryogenic stasis or whatever. And much like Futurama. And then he woke up in a timeline where there was aliens all over the earth killing and eating human beings. And you had to be a pilot of a suit in order to survive. And human beings were in war with these aliens. So when he initially wakes up, you know, he has that culture shock of, this isn't the world that I went to sleep in. And now he's scared of the aliens. Even going to the point where he's crying all the time and pissing himself. Even at one point in Blue Gender, he pisses himself because he is so afraid of these aliens. But over time, he fucking gets used to it. Now he's used to the world that he lives in. Now, I still don't believe that, you know, a woman who saw you piss yourself is now all of a sudden going to fall in love with you. I don't buy that. You know, you pissed yourself out of fear, and now all of a sudden she's like, yeah, I banged this guy. I don't see how that's realistic. It's a story, but I'm just saying. But over time, he became a little bit more badass. He got used to being in that world. He got used to being in that position. That's really what the growth of the story is supposed to be. It's like, it's cool to be frightened and shocked, because most of these anime stories are about kids. You know, they're 12, 13 years old. They're in these insane situations. And that's why, you know, sometimes you can push through it, you know, because they're kids. But over time, even a child is going to get used to, you know, the danger, the deadliness. They're not gonna break down and cry every time something bad happens, you know. But we still have these male protagonists now that are just like weeping all the time, and it has bled over into, like I said, comic books. You know, where you have these dour, submissive male heroes, like, you know. People joke a lot about Tom King's Batman. Batman basically uses his wives and girlfriends or whatever as therapists. That, you know, he you know, spills his heart all over the page, and he's constantly with the nicknames and being super sensitive, and he's showing her a different side of who he is. And it's like, yeah, but ask any full-grown adult woman who is not politically minded, because they'll tell you what they want. They'll tell you what you want to hear. You talk to some of the feminists, they'll be like, "Oh, I love if a man was to cry in front of me," and behind his back, you'll be like, "This dude crying all the time, ugh," and it's just the facts, B. They want to see a different side of you. So yeah, sure, they want to see you cry sometimes. They want to see what makes you emotional. What hits you in the emotional beats. Or did you cry? Did you cry at your wedding? Did you cry at your mom's funeral? Did you cry at your child's birth? Those kind of things. Not this guy at work scares me, and I don't know what to do. She don't want to hear that. She don't want to see you getting knocked out and pissing yourself because you're so afraid of this guy. Like, no, that would never work. That does not work in storytelling. The crybaby protagonist does not work. He does not get the girl. Now, in the scene that I was watching of the show Tokyo Revengers, is that the guy basically was apologizing to his girlfriend because he was weak. He got bullied and beat up and tied up, and she was like, you being who you are is what I like. I like you for who you are, and you're not the tough guy. You're not that, but you're fine how you are. And I'm like, okay, well, that's a cool story. There are 13 in this situation here, right? Even though he's a full-grown man, his consciousness is in the body of a 13-year-old. So he's in his own body, but it's from 10 years prior or something like that, 12 years prior. And it still doesn't make, like, it would make sense for a little girl to think that way, but a full-grown woman to see you beat up all the time, tied up, always apologizing, constantly getting bullied and picked on and pushed around, I don't think that's anything that a woman seems to be attracted to, especially when you look at the history of women, and you see here how if you go off the archetype of what a man is or what a woman is or whatever, you start seeing things that begin to not make any sense. Like, one of the things is women are usually smaller than men. So the man is seen as being a protector. Part of being a protector is being strong, or at least exuding some version of strength. That could just be size. Women, that's why women like tall men. Tall guys are more attractive because they're seen as being better protectors. Same thing with guys who are muscular. They're seen as being better protectors. Some guys, the big boy, big fat dude, he might also be considered a pretty good protector. And that's part of what women find attractive. Why would a woman find a man who is constantly weeping, regardless of his size or age? Why would she find that attractive? And then you have to ask, why would a male see that as somebody who is a role model? Why would you see a man crying? A man weeping all the time for something that, it's not his dad dying or something like that. It's not something that's truly heartbreaking. It's just, oh no, this thing is very tough. I don't know what to do. It's like, I don't see that as being heroic. But I see constantly that that's the curvature of the culture right now, where you have, because Japanese manga and anime are so dominant in American culture, that people are starting to pick up certain things that comes from those cultures. And one of those things might just be the crybaby protagonist. And I don't want nothing to do with that. I don't want anything to do with it. Like, you can have sad stories, you can have emotional stories. Comic books have already done that. One of my favorite series is Spider-Man Blue by Jeff Loeb. I think it's Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. I love Spider-Man Blue. It's about Spider-Man thinking about the good days with Gwen Stacy. And we know how Peter Parker loves Gwen Stacy. And it was emotional. And he's writing these love letters to Gwen. And it's like he's remembering the good days that when he used to hang out with Gwen Stacy. But he's not weeping on every page. He is being very emotional. He's being very vulnerable. He's letting us in and telling us how he feels about Gwen Stacy and Gwen Stacy being dead. But he's not crying on every page. You know, Gwen Stacy's been dead for a while. You know, he's kind of moved on with his life. That doesn't mean that he forgot. They did a similar thing, Daredevil Yellow, where, it's Karen Page, who had died in the Kevin Smith Daredevil series. And they did a similar story where it's like half the story is Matt Murdock talking about his dad. And his dad who was killed by the mob. And, he was writing about him, and then he was writing about Karen because Karen was dead. And they did something similar with Captain America. It was Captain America White, where it was Captain America. They was talking about Bucky, the kid that he was responsible for, who he thought was dead. Of course, Bucky later becomes the Winter Soldier. But at the time of the writing of the story, Bucky was dead, or in that universe. It was kind of a separate universe. And, like, you can do emotional stories with your heroes being emotional and being vulnerable and talking about things that matter to them and confessing their love for things, people, places, ideas, and still not weeping on every page. You can be in a difficult situation. You can be in a tough spot and not break down and cry. But the days of the Goku, and I forget the name of the guy from the Fist of the North Star, and Guts from Berserk, these guys who are sort of stoic, who, they felt the things that bothered them. They feel it. They're not completely and totally, without emotion. But they push through that shit. They don't break down. They don't whine and they don't cry. These are grown fucking men. And it's like, I get that some of these anime are for little boys. But at the same time, all little boys want to be shown what they should be. I say this all the time, that I can't remember, I read this in a book. I can't remember what book though. Is that little boys very rarely, only when they don't have any options, do they look up to other little boys, right? But children look up to adults. They look up to role models, On very rare occasions when they don't have any male role models, will a little boy look up to another little boy, And that's when you truly get gang culture, because gang culture is all about, I'm 14, I'm looking up to a 17-year-old. He's a little bit older than I am. And he's my role model, because there's no uncles, no pastors, no coaches, no imams, nobody else there to look after me, no dads, definitely. So I'll model myself after somebody who's in a similar age group than I am. But most of the time, when you see young boys, they are interested in men, manhood. How are you supposed to be a man? And in these stories, most often than not, you have these situations where these young boys are crying. Not because there aren't any male role models, but you have to ask, if the young boys that these stories are written for, do they see these characters as heroes? And you have to say, probably not. But that's one of the enduring things about something like Dragon Ball and Cowboy Bebop, where you didn't have, while Spike wasn't a complete and total badass, Spike was witty, Spike was cool, he was able to stare down danger. He went through tough situations and he was emotional about it, but he never really broke down and wept over it. You saw that these things bothered them, but you also saw how to overcome it, how to push through, how to move forward. Today, I'm not seeing a lot of that. I'm seeing a lot of, you're sure they're pushing through it eventually, but it's like so much tears involved. And I hate it. I absolutely hate it. If there's one thing I hate about Japanese anime, it's the rape, one. And two is the crybaby male protagonist. I actually cannot stand it. I hate it. It's just, I hate it because I don't see it as being I see it as being overdone, for starters. But then I also don't see it as being useful as far as a storytelling device. Like, you can write stories where men are emotional. Again, I just went through quite a few, and those are American. But the more Japanese manga and anime penetrate American markets, with these, effeminate, whiny male protagonists, the more you're going to see American comic book companies mimic that shit. And it'll eventually get into wrestling to try to dovetail this. Like when you saw Seth Rollins with the man's man or something like that shirt that he had for Seth Rollins. That sucked. That was emasculating. Like why would you do that? That doesn't do you any good. But I'm going on long enough. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace out.